We all make lists. Whether that be of things we need to do in order to watch our backlog of movies, our favourite characters or episodes from a certain show, we all do it. I've done 2 on this channel. Ranking a series of games dear to me, ruined by the abusive culture cultivated at the development studios worldwide, and one about cloud gaming services. However mismarketed some of those are. Within the last 8 or 9 months, I have also re-entered the world of God of War. This initially came around due to Sony looking to close the PS3 and Vita stores, and as such, getting all of the games that I wanted to keep and play downloaded on the Vita and PS3. It also came around from 2 other factors. Using PS Now as part of the cloud gaming run of videos, and the fact that all bar God of War Betrayal are playable on it. And what better way to test a cloud service than with some of the quickest and best hack and slash titles out there? The final point? Well, we're on a fast track to the game that has a tagline of Ragnarok is coming, due in 2022. So it is high time to refresh yourself on the journey so far, either by playing all of the games yourself, or watching my history of God of War linked in the card and description box below. But hey, you came here for a list, right? Welcome everybody, my name is Doragon, and this is my God of War games ranking list. I do need to get this out of the way before entering this list. The entire series of God of War is full of exceptional titles. Some are more from a story perspective, some mechanically, and some just on the sheer groundbreaking nature of their release. Therefore, any order that these are in should not be taken as a "this game is so much worse than that one." It could simply be that the limitations of its release platform and modern expectation prevent that game from exceeding a certain ranking position in 2021. If you like a game towards the bottom of my list, and would personally place it higher, I would not blame you for such a thought. The nostalgia and what a game means in a certain moment to an individual vastly changes a ranking list. Now mine will be similar, and I will try within my description of each game to outline why I have placed each title where it is. Feel free to agree or disagree with my listing, and let me know your thoughts and rankings in the comments section below. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the rankings list. Number 8. God of War Betrayal. Released just prior to the smartphone revolution, Betrayal was a canonical mobile phone title released for select popular dumb phones. It told the story of Kratos' life as a new god, that would eventually be expanded upon in Ghost of Sparta and God of War 2. The game was used to set up much of the gods of Olympus' annoyance at Kratos due to being framed for the murder of Hera's prized pet and his own subsequent murderous actions, killing Hermes' son. Betrayal offered series stalwart combat on a phone, but the title was slow and clunky in comparison to its console counterparts. What it did do, however, was succeed in taking the series mobile and to a much wider audience than PlayStation hardware alone offered. I played this game while travelling Australia, and it made up for my lack of a PS2 and TV while backpacking around a foreign country. Revolutionary for its time, it is now only accessible through retro tech or emulation, the latter of which can overcome many of the title's shortfalls through machine learning. However, the game doesn't compare to the graphics or fidelity of mobile games that were released just a year or 2 later for smartphones, even with emulation upscaling and machine learning. Short and compelling as the story and era gameplay are, it is held back in 2021 by being a late release on disposable technology that no longer exists. Number 7. God of War Ascension. Ascension suffered from its release order. Released after both God of War 3, which closed out the Greek saga, and Ghost of Sparta, which filled in many historical gaps and humanized Kratos, this tried to tell the story of Kratos' oath to Ares, the breaking of said oath, and the consequences of breaking an oath with a god of Olympus. The events of the game eventually lead Kratos into the servitude of the gods, which we see and experience in both Chains of Olympus and God of War. This, however, was all done after we knew everything that came afterwards in Kratos' story. Due to this fact, many people felt like this game was a step backwards and not as good as what had come before in the series. In actuality, it is one of the most mechanically sound God of War games, graphically superior to even 3, and is more character and narrative driven than ever before. While weapon variety is much smaller than previous iterations of the franchise, only offering elemental variations on the chained blades of chaos, the elemental aspect gave it a much more nuanced combat edge than many other iterations in the series. Puzzles were a tad more simplistic, but not a breeze, and due to knowing what came after, the narrative was predictable and any stakes were undermined, as there were 6 stories after this for the character to live through. The biggest sin of Ascension, however, was franchise fatigue. This was the 7th game in the series, including Betrayal, and it did the exact same things as the first. Same controls, same gameplay loop, same combat stylings. It was just tried, tested, perfected, and done to death by this point in the franchise. Returning to it now, and playing the games in chronological order, Ascension makes so much sense, is a stupendous beginning to the series, and was a vital part of the narrative and lore that we now know and readily accept. But at its launch, it was just tired, and pushed an incredibly patient fanbase over the edge. I really like Ascension, and the multiplayer edition was an interesting and fun PvP mode that's not really been replicated in the industry since. The story is vital to the God of War lore even now, and recently playing it on PS Now, it is better mechanically than even the mighty God of War 3. It simply needed to come out much, much sooner to be accepted well for the great game that it actually is. Number 6. God of War. Released on the PlayStation 2 in 2005, God of War shattered expectations. Mostly because there were none. This was the game that started it all. A simple idea. What if a man was tricked and betrayed by a god, and was then given the opportunity for revenge? Greek mythology offered all of the relevant MacGuffins to tell such a tale, and the reputation of Ares put him in the prime position to be the god at the heart of the story. David Jaffe directed a simplistic narrative around mechanics that made Devil May Cry question if it was actually hack and slash. While simplistic, the story was rich, and though giving us a bit of an anti-hero as our protagonist, made him sympathetic through well-placed and paced backstory. Beautifully narrated by the ever-phenomenal Linda Hunt, this game put its story in amazingly bombastic cutscenes that was somehow surpassed by the bombastic gameplay and boss battles on a PS2 system. Mechanically sound, God of War changed the industry narrative on what gameplay combat could be. Wild, destructive, powerful and nuanced, this wasn't a button-mashing experience. Instead, it required forethought, timing, and an understanding of the unique aspects that each foe on the battlefield brought to the table. With its God Mode difficulty challenge, God of War also gave us something that has spawned an entire development studio since. It gave us an ultra-difficult version of the game, with unlockable secrets and extras locked behind beating that mode. The player needed to be pinpoint accurate, perfect in their timing and execution, and knowledgeable in every aspect of the game to prepare for what was coming next. They also needed a huge amount of patience and determination to see God Mode through to its conclusion. Something I am proud to say, I managed to do. This mode created a fanbase of players ready to chew through literally anything that From Software can throw at them, due to their experience in these hyper-difficult games. God of War sits at number 6 due to its ungraceful aging. From the patriarchal depiction of women in the game, to the badly aged graphics even with a HD makeover. The controls being slightly off from what felt normal at the time and not in line with the rest of the series thereafter, and a far cry from normal and natural in 2021. Overly long and dragged out sectors of gameplay in a story that lasts only 10 hours at the top end, and barring standouts such as T.C. Carson and Linda Hunt, some subpar voice acting. So much so, many actors were replaced for the sequel. God of War is a great game, and one that we needed to get everything thereafter. But it is eclipsed by much of the rest of the series now, and can only really be elevated to 6th by being the first of the series. Number 5. God of War. Chains of Olympus. The PSP was and is an exceptional handheld console. Taking the PS2's ethos and putting it in your pocket was a stroke of genius by Sony. And while travelling the world between the ages of 18 and 21, the PSP was my only console. When I bought Chains of Olympus, it was on a whim. I had no idea of the series, lore or characters, and bought it second-hand off the blurb on the box. This game presented a very different Kratos to me than the one that I then saw through the rest of the series. It translated everything from the first 2 games onto a handheld device. From graphics to mechanics, storytelling to scale, Ready at Dawn Studios put an exceptional title out in 2008 that made even home console owners of Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s jealous. Working around the system's single thumb nub and 2 shoulder buttons rather than 4, what the team delivered was nothing short of fantastic. It was my first taste of the series, and due to when it was released, it came with the exceptional acting that we know from all bar the first game. The lean into Greek mythology was unlike anything else that I had seen up to that point, and despite this Spartan warrior being the catalyst that takes out Persephone and chains Atlas up to hold the world upon his shoulders, was oddly accurate to the mythology. I loved every aspect of the game. From the gameplay to the puzzles, the dip in and out nature of the PSP, the story, characterization, mythology, lore, and rewards for beating the game, it offered everything long-time gamers were used to and wanted from AAA titles, but you could play it on the bus or ferry. It has since become available on the PS Vita and PlayStation TV, along with an HD remaster alongside its PSP sequel Ghost of Sparta on the PlayStation 3. Now available on the PlayStation Cloud service PS Now, playable on PS4, 5 and Windows devices, it is a seminal game that can be played nearly anywhere and should definitely be experienced by any God of War fan. For me, it sits right in the middle of the pack due to the limitations of the PSP's proprietary UMD game discs, the console itself, and the sheer quality of all else coming up on the list. The discs weren't huge, and despite being a great medium in terms of tech, storage and travel protection, they couldn't give a one-to-one scale console experience on the go. The design of the PSP was also a detracting factor in that scenario, just from placement of the buttons and the strain that gaming for extended periods on the device put upon your hands. I love that it's available readily on more modern systems to still enjoy in comfort, and that the game that got me into the series has remained relevant, even into 2021. Number 4. God of War 2. 2 years after the first game, new director Cory Barlog brought a changed and rage-filled Kratos to our screens. Starting the game as the actual God of War, the power fantasy was in full flow. But Kratos' war against the cities loyal to the other gods had incurred the wrath of Zeus. Killed in the game's opening, we then spend the entire title attempting to undo our current fate via a quest to find the Sisters of Fate and convince them to allow Kratos to use the loom. Meeting many mythological heroes and villains along the way, Kratos carves a bloody path before him. Succeeding in his quest, though not via the peaceful means he spoke of, and returning to the moment of his death to attempt to kill Zeus, the title weaves a time-travelling narrative that feels heavily inspired by Back to the Future. With a grander story that would bleed into the next game, God of War 2 took the amazing groundwork laid by the original and worked to perfect the formula. From characterization to narrative, gameplay to design, everything was better in the sequel. Mechanics were more natural and fluid for weapons, combat, exploration, and magic. The narrative was more cohesive and married with the gameplay segments better, eliminating those drawn-out aspects from the first game. Graphics were a huge step forward, and some clever camera trickery gave a hugely increased sense of scale. Boss battles had mechanics and were more than just a heavy-hitting damage sponge this time. Acting and cutscenes were no longer cheesy and overtly male fantasy. Instead, they told a story, filled in lore blanks, and were acted really well by every single member of cast, lending an additional nod to the game's direction. While still suffering from some of the shortfalls of its predecessor, with the objectification of women and even poorly aged visuals for a latter PS2 title, God of War 2 does enough as a sequel to elevate it beyond its origin point. It took the bigger and better cliché and actually used that to its advantage, offering a more complete and cohesive experience than the first title. It landed narrative twists and cliffhangers in its final act, which then had gamers chomping at the bit for the conclusion of Kratos' story. Number 3. God of War. Ghost of Sparta. The second to last release of the Greek saga of Kratos, we knew how the story ended before we started playing this game. But like Revenge of the Sith, knowing what comes next sometimes offers one of the best narratives in an entire series. Set after the events of Betrayal but before God of War 2, Ghost of Sparta tells the story of Kratos' ascension to a god and the nightmares of his past from before he was even known as the Ghost of Sparta. This game filled in the blanks created by dialogue in God of War 2 and 3, and showed that both Sony Santa Monica and Ready at Dawn Studios knew the full lore of the Kratos saga before putting pen to paper in the early days. Playing better than Chains of Olympus, the previous PSP title, and looking better than God of War 2, Ghost of Sparta quickly started to solidify itself as one of the best games in the entire series. And it did this on an aging handheld console at the time. A deeply personal and character-driven narrative that put stakes in all of Kratos' in-game actions, humanized an anti-hero who had become the personification of rage in the mainline console releases. Ghost of Sparta nearly completed a story that explained Kratos' descent into a destroyer of worlds, and did so in such a manner that we as the player actually began to understand, like, and empathize with this mass-murdering demigod. His life had been haunted and tampered with by the gods of Olympus since childhood. Seeing that tampering on screen, and realizing the gods have caused Kratos to lose 3 families over time, his birth family, his wife and child, and the gods themselves, only managed to solidify feelings of justification to Kratos' destruction of the Pantheon. While not doing anything particularly new for the series in regards to mechanics and gameplay, and in actuality stripping much of it back to a more simplistic approach and using many reused assets from Chains of Olympus, the narrative was so strong in Ghost of Sparta that the act of playing the game was totally secondary to the continuing story, which was longer, more complete, and better in all regards than its PSP predecessor. As with Chains of Olympus, this game is currently available in a variety of formats and manners, and I am so glad that one of the greatest narratives in the series is still readily available in 2021. Held back only slightly due to its original release platform, Ghost of Sparta actually does hold up as a complete game experience and is another must-play for any God of War fan. Number 2. God of War 3. The greatest game of the original saga, God of War 3 closed the series out perfectly. Taking lessons learned across 3 studios and 4 other releases by this time, Sony Santa Monica and game director Stig Asmussen addressed many of the concerns and shortcomings of the rest of the series, and utilising the PS3's power, built a game that blew even the longest die-hard fans away. Picking up on the exact same cutscene that finished God of War 2, just looking fancier on the PS3 now, 3 launches immediately into the action and doesn't hold your hand. The opening sequence is a massive set piece, with gods and titans battling in real time and real size around you, as you the player engage in a boss battle with Poseidon, god of the seas and Zeus's brother. that puts into light just how terrifying Kratos actually is as an opponent. In a stunning directive choice, we become the victim when the camera cuts to a first-person view looking at Kratos from the eyes of Poseidon. Forced to enter the quick-time events that progress the game, we get a first-person view of the rage and brutality of our protagonist until he literally puts out the lights. Completed within 20 to 40 minutes depending on the chosen difficulty setting, God of War 3 has already done things that its predecessors could only dream of, and there's over 10 more hours of content yet to take in. Running faster and smoother than ever, with that sound design that I don't think has been surpassed even now, God of War 3 is an experience like no other in the series. Kratos is at his most lethal and dangerous, yet the narrative, much like Ghost of Sparta, enables us to still empathise with him and will him to victory, despite the countless amount of lives lost in his quest. Boss battles are much bigger and much more varied than ever before. From having to utilise perfect dodges and counterattacks against Hades, to a platform puzzler with mobs to beat Kronos. Hermes must be predicted, and Hercules is the ultimate test of strength. We end with a 3-phase boss fight against Zeus that shows off the king of the gods' true power when, after yet another death, the game asks if you want to lower the difficulty. Quick switching of weapons was finally introduced with a tap of the D-pad, and having magic directly connected to weapons created a seamless in-game combat experience, rather than having to pause to change things around mid-battle as in previous games. Every single bit of acting was other-level awesome, and T.C. Carson signed off the series with his greatest performance to date of Kratos. The now infamous and rather distasteful sex minigame from other titles in the series had narrative reasoning here, and while still awkward, distasteful and being a pure male fantasy, it did actually fit the characters involved, was so much better than the earlier iterations, and also had narrative implications further down the line, giving it an actual place and reason in the game, rather than being for a teenager's private bank. While there are some really harsh difficulty spikes that go against the flow of the rest of the game, and soft and imprecise flight controls that are two big set pieces, overall, God of War 3 is a masterpiece of its time, with a few minor flaws. It holds up amazingly well in 2021, even doing things better than more modern games, such as narrative pacing, anti-hero characterization, and the clever use of reused assets as part of the narrative. It strikes the perfect balance between satisfying a need, wrapping up a saga, and leaving the player wanting just that little bit more. Number 1. God of War. What is a soft reboot? Well, it's a silly term really, because it tends to apply to a sequel that is doing things ever so slightly differently. God of War from 2018, to be fair, did a lot of things differently. Gone was the Greek setting. Gone was the ultra-macho physique. Gone was the goatee. Gone was the overt and outward rage. Gone was the fixed camera. Gone were the magics of Greece. Gone were the dual-chained blades of chaos. At least initially. God of War told the story of a much, much older Kratos. A god made whole again when he absorbed his own godly power from the blade of Olympus after running himself through. Cursed so he cannot die by his own hand or of old age, Kratos found himself in Norway where he built a new family. Fourth time's the charm, right? The narrative impetus is simple. Scatter his wife Faye's ashes from the tallest point in all the realms. This quest, however, will lead Kratos and his boy on a realm-hopping journey that will bring them into contact and conflict with the Aesir and Vanir gods of the Norse pantheon, along with other races such as the Light and Dark Elves along the way. Beautifully paced narrative that fits so well with the open exploration of a semi-open world. Cory Balrog's return to the directing of the series brought yet another massive change in the character and mechanics. The story was more mature and introspective, leaning heavily into a new mythology, but like the Greek saga before it, remaining incredibly accurate despite the characters of Kratos and Atreus being the catalysts for many of the Norse mythology's moments coming to pass. This narrative choice is actually a stroke of genius from the writing team, as Atreus was to be called Loki by his mother, and in the original myths, Loki is always the catalyst for change. Characterization is fuller and more complex than the Greek saga, where Kratos eventually became quite two-dimensional due to his need for revenge, which likely led to the feeling of needing to flesh the character out internally in Ghost of Sparta and Ascension. Here, we see the character that we have known trying to be better, trying to shake off the thoughts and reactions of his past, trying to move past the cycle of violence. Once again, Atreus is the catalyst for this change, for Kratos wanting to be better, and it makes the player much more engaged, especially if you have grown up from the age of 18 playing God of War such as I have, and this more mature Kratos approach fits your actual real views and experiences of the world. It extends to the supporting cast as well. No one is here just to fill a role. Baldur wants to feel anything and has been on a decades-long quest to make that happen, not really caring about what it may entail or who it may hurt. Freya is the kind and loving soul of the myths and Marvel universe, but due to Loki being in a different timeline, has ostracized herself from the other gods, including her son, due to her overprotective and overcritical actions. Odin never actually appears, but is fully fleshed out, ready for when he does. Same with Tymir, Thor, even a non-person entity such as Fimbulwinter is fully fleshed out, but none of it is done in drawn-out cutscenes when the player isn't engaged. Instead, it's during platforming, quiet traversal and rowing, and as a conversation between the characters that we actually care about. But it's not just narratively that God of War stands above the rest of the series. Audio is easily on par with God of War 3, or anything else that is on the market. Visually, it is stunning, and looks even better with next-gen patches, allowing it to run at 4K 60fps throughout. The combat is completely overhauled, and offers a new and fresh take on the series combat that we knew for 7 games previous, elevating it to one of, if not the best, currently available. The acting throughout is phenomenal. No longer do you enter an area and wonder if the next dialogue line is coming from an infomercial actor or one of the best in the business. Every actor is on point, regardless of what work they have done previously. And while I feel for T.C. Carson and us fans who knew him as Kratos for many years, Christopher Judge slides into the role and the changing character exceptionally well. The fact that we even get a Teal'c indeed in the game is just a lovely homage to Chris Judge's other work and his longtime fans. The game even took the God mode ethos of earlier titles with Give Me God of War mode, and gave us the most brutally challenging game many people will ever play. And yes, I do include the Soulsborne titles within that comment. But it goes even further. God of War 2018 is accessible. Are you colorblind? No problem, God of War has settings to help. Are you physically challenged? God of War has settings to help. Do you just want to experience the story? God of War has settings to help. Many studios are making an effort to allow gamers of all abilities to play their games, with varying levels of success. The first-party Sony studios, however, seem to be working together and offering more and more accessibility options with each new release. While God of War isn't now one of the most accessible games on the market, at the time of its release, it was groundbreaking, and I can only hope that the next installment pushes the boat out even further, and even more people are able to play, experience, and enjoy this game. God of War just brought everything together. It had the moments for the old fans, but really ensured that the new players weren't left out in the cold, with the characters around Kratos learning his story as the players did. It evolved a two-dimensional character into a fully formed human with cares, worries, concerns, and personal challenges that led to growth, acceptance, healing, and joy. It offered both player autonomy and impetus in equal measure, when one is normally sacrificed for the other elsewhere in the industry. Mechanically satisfying and without a bug in sight in my multiple playthroughs, a level of challenge to aspire to and a legacy that lives on many years later, means that for me, no other game within this series, at least for now, can take this #1 spot. So that's it. That's my list. my ranking of the God of War games that we have access to in September 2021. Please feel free to discuss with me and others in the comments how you would personally list them. As I said at the start, any of these ranking lists are a personal preference, even from huge media outlets. So if this order doesn't reflect what you feel, that's fine. I'm not an authority on the matter, nor telling you that this is how you should feel. These are my personal feelings as of September 2021. And who knows? Once we get Ragnarok, or whatever they're going to call it, or if I play the games again subsequently, this order could indeed change. Well, with Ragnarok it would definitely change, as I then need to add another game in. Anyhow, I would like to thank you all very much for tuning in. Please do not forget to do the usual. Like and share the video if you enjoyed it, comment down below your thoughts on the matter, and of course slap that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. There are links to my socials in the description box below, along with an invite to the Nerdmigos Discord server if you wish to chat with us directly. Otherwise, your viewership is more than enough for me. My name is Doragon. This has been my ranking of the God of War games in September 2021 on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And until next time, guys, have yourselves a fantastic day, and take care.